Okay, folks, back again. It was mentioned in class as well that perhaps we're a little unclear on some of the political history with Iran, and it's really significant for Iran because of the revolution. Now, fair warning in terms of what I'm going to go through, this is a little bit more detailed than what you need for the exam if you're taking the exam. However, it will give you additional amazing information. If you ever go on Jeopardy, you are going to be well prepared for any question related to Iran that might come up. It also might just help with additional context, but I'm going to move through this as efficiently as possible. So there is the initial introduction of democracy in Iran takes place between about 1905 and 1909. The Constitution of Iran has the following, and those elements are direct elections, separation of powers, a very strong executive with that is controlled by cabinet members. There's popular sovereignty. It is important to keep in mind that Iran does not have universal suffrage. Women cannot vote until 1963. There's a Bill of Rights in the original Iranian constitution. Shiism or Shia Islam is retained as the official religion, but the laws are made by an elected parliament or majlis, as we talked about in class, which is unicameral, and there is an established guardian council of clerics. Clerics are also referred to as ulema. And that guardian council in the original initial Iranian constitution of early 1900s, even then the guardian council, which was a religious group, had veto power over legislation in the majlis. Just in terms of context, note this is the same time period that we get the establishment of the United States of Mexico with its constitution. We're running up to the Russian Revolution. We're about to have the beginnings of the Chinese Communist Revolution. So this is all during that same period of self-determination and starting to break free of the history of empire, or at least attempting to, right before and right after World War One. In 1909, so during this time that we're establishing the uh, first democracy that's going to exist in Iran, oil is discovered in Iran. The BP oil will be established at that point in time. So British Petroleum, Britain actually pushes in a company to develop the oil reserves in Iran. And Iran does not have a lot of control over its oil production and wealth initially, and this leads to some later significant political challenges within Iran and a significant negative response to outside influence and outside engagement when it comes to colonial and post-colonial actions by Western powers like the United Kingdom, countries in Western Europe, and the United States. The Shah, he's actually the second Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Um, he took power from his father. Actually, there was a coup d'etat. So Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi um, overthrew the government of his dad with help from the British and the Soviets in 1941. The view was that his father was not supporting the goals of those two governments during World War II and allowing those two governments to gain access to oil reserves. There is, even though we have this coup d'etat, we do continue with a democratically elected government. So this is a constitutional monarchy that's established after 1941. It was led by Mohammad Mossadegh, but Mossadegh as prime minister. So we have a parliamentary system and around this point, again, it's a constitutional monarchy, sought to nationalize the oil industry and pull away from British control, British petroleum. And as a result, there was a coup d'etat in 1953, another one that was organized in this case for the United States and the United Kingdom predominantly to remove Mossadegh as prime minister and basically turn Iran into less of a constitutional monarchy and eventually what is basically best described as an almost well, not absolute, but a highly authoritarian monarchy. The Shah rapidly consolidates control, limits democracy, um, forms a secret state-run police force referred to as SAVAK that's formed in the late 1950s. SAVAK was well known, especially in the 60s and 70s, to arrest, torture, kill, disappear political dissidents, especially people who resisted his regime, people who identified as communist or socialist, and also people who were religious objectors to his form of governance. That means people who were often Shia clergy and people who were religiously observant. He centralized power very quickly. His interior ministry actually appointed provincial governors, town mayors, school district superintendents. So, folks, the Shah was following the authoritarian playbook of how to set up and govern his country at that time. Other actions that he took that are similar to some of the actions taken in other countries at that time there was a focus on improving industrial agriculture and manufacturing. This is the same time as the Mexican miracle, the time of rapid industrial and economic growth in the 1950s. He does also build up the US military significantly with US help. By 1979, so the time of the revolution, Iran actually has the fifth largest military in the world and is now the world's 14th or 15th largest. But by the time the revolution happens, Iran to become a really close US ally and a regional power, specifically in trying to maintain a US sphere of influence. This is the period of containment and pushing back against the Soviet Union. The Shah secularizes the legal system. Sharia law is moved away or out of the legal system, which was a significant shift and change, does support women's suffrage and women's rights. That had actually started under his father when headscarves or hijabs were banned and men shaving their beards was an expectation. The Shah continues those policies and also will encourage and support women gaining the right to vote in 1963, like I mentioned earlier. Okay. He is going to refer to this as the White Revolution, as opposed to a red revolution, like a communist revolution. We're going to weaken powers of the clergy. The way this was done is the government would buy land that was held by clergy landowners because many of the Muslim clerics actually had land holdings. The money that was paid was very little and not reflective of the value of the land, but it then would be sold or redistributed to create local farms. The goal here is to strengthen agricultural production. As I mentioned earlier, voting rights for women, allowing to work and encouraging women to work outside the home. Iran becomes entrenched as an oil-reliant rentier state. Now, this is something that, if you're just listening to this now, right before the exam, we haven't talked about rentier states very much, but we will as an economic, something we cover with economics right before the exam takes place. But a rentier state is a country or a state that obtains a majority of its GDP, its gross domestic product, from natural resource, in this case, oil exploitation. Okay. Um, Nigeria is a rentier state. Russia is a rentier state. Mexico is a former rentier state, which has become economically diversified. The problem with being a rentier state is you get behavior that's known as rent seeking. That means that the Shah's supporters would receive profits or rents from oil production and oil exploitation, and we get a ruling elite in Iran as a result, very, very closely tied to the Shah as uh, as the monarch. The Shah is going to use this infrastructure on a positive end to industrialize, but on a negative end to increase personal power. Taxation is going to not take place when it comes to supporting the government. Instead, oil revenue will drive most of all the government spending, and its industrialization. Folks, this is fine when oil prices are high, but it is not when oil prices drop significantly. And that is exactly what's going to happen in the 1970s. And that's going to be one of the key triggers for the Iranian Islamic Revolution. Okay, so the Shah's downfall. So you can see in this image, folks, the Shah of Iran was living an incredibly lavish, visibly uh, opulent lifestyle, and try to connect his rule back to uh, ancient Persia. He crowns himself in 1967 in a really expensive ceremony, and gives himself the title of Shah or King of Kings. Other actions that the Shah took that kind of primed Iran for revolution. The Shah, and this is insignificant, folks, because these are the kinds of actions that lead to revolutions in general. So a complete and total regime change. When you make when there are these kinds of conditions in a country, we're setting a country up for a significant change in authority and power. The Shah suppresses civil liberties. Media is not free. It's going to be very much state run. There's a pro democracy educated elite become very alienated from governance, and many of them leave the country. Iranian nationalists are going to become very, uh, very worked up because of the Shah's closeness with the United States. Um, the poor are going to be ignored. He's acting in a way that's more or less, we're not really authoritarian. We're moving toward totalitarianism in terms of his influence and power. Um, Very quick secularization alienated large numbers of people who were religiously observant. Um, Pro-Soviet communists get really energized as well. So you actually have three different groups, folks. Um, Pro-democracy educated elite, pro-Soviet, pro-so pro-socialist communists, and then a religiously observant clergy and people who are Shia Muslim, all pushing back against the regime. So again, we get to this point, as you can see in the image, where people are burning pictures and effigies of the Shah. The Shah's actions mirror those in all the revolutions that have taken place in the world. He grabbed too much political power as a single leader. He misread the uniting power, in the case of Iran, as the uniting power of a unique religious and cultural history, and violated democratic norms that could be visible in other countries. So, tie everything quickly together here. Macro big picture triggers in 1975. So this is after the end of the OPEC oil embargo. Oil prices began to decrease at the same time that consumer prices increase more than 20%. So we have massive, significant, very sudden inflation. And you know from the United States exactly how little people like inflation in the US. Um, Comparatively, folks, we experienced an inflation rate of anywhere from 3 to 5% over a 4-year period. This is in a year to 2 years, a 20% inflation rate. So people were very, very frustrated by this. Inflation does continue to be a problem, a challenge for the Iranian government now because of its reliance on oil. Another big picture trigger, the US put pressure on the Shah to loosen restraints on the opposition. That means that people who were protesting were being actually encouraged or given the space to protest more. Um, Savak, the secret state police, had become incredibly brutal by the time we're in the late 70s. Clerics and the religiously observant began to organize. And then there were some small triggers. One of them that you would definitely not have learned about in um, global or world history, but it is significant in Iranian history. And that is, and I just want you to kind of pay attention to the months here because the actual revolution is the beginning of 1979. There's a fire in a movie theater, the Cinema Rex, in August 1979, where 430 Iranians died. They were burned alive. The Shah's government blamed Islamic extremists, people who were religiously observant, and uh, clerics, and people who just questioned the Shah's heavy handed government in general. So that means people who were pro democracy activists, people who were also pro Soviet communists, actually questioned exactly how forthcoming the government was being. In other words, it became the view was that it was a conspiracy, and the Shah's government was shutting down the information, so that when it did come out that there had been 10 people arrested and 5 of them confessed as pro-Islamic revolution extremists, nobody believed the government. An additional trigger, again, this is first one in August, September of 1978, the Shah declares martial law or military law, and the Shah officially exiles uh, Ruhollah Khomeini, who will become the Ayatollah Khomeini, from Iran and forces Saddam Hussein in Iraq to forcibly deport uh, the Ayatollah from Iraq after he had lived in Iraq, basically in exile since 1965. And this is where we get the founding of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So we had the revolution in January. The Shah flees Iran in February 1979. There's a national referendum in April to vote out the monarchy and establish the Islamic Republic. The Ayatollah Khomeini will be named the supreme leader or Ayatollah, and the constitution will be drawn up, that is approved by referendum, drawn up by a elected assembly of religious experts, 73 clerics who have been chosen by the people. Broad authority in the constitution was given to Khomeini and the clergy, because we are establishing a theocracy. And this constitution was basically presented to the Iranian public in the middle of a hostage crisis between Iran and the United States. We have a serious diplomatic crisis, and there was high hostility toward the United States. There was also a really strong feeling of nationalism and unity behind voting for this constitution, even though it ended up being a constitution that heavily marginalizes pro democracy activists, actively pushes out any possibility for socialist communists to have any kind of voice in government. The electorate, the voting population in Iran overwhelmingly supported the new constitution, and the changes that took place in the following months under Khomeini's leadership are sudden and significant. And as an aside, if you'd like to kind of experience and learn more about this shift and how fast it is, definitely would encourage you to watch the movie Persepolis or read the graphic novel Persepolis, which is a really great job at encapsulating this period in Iran's history from the standpoint of uh, first a young girl and eventually a woman, no, a grown woman. Grown woman. I can't speak, folks. I've been talking a lot. So there you go. There's the overview. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in class.